My son, keep your father's commandments, and do not forsake the Torah of your mother. Bind them to your heart forever, tie them around your neck.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, y'all. Cold day here. I bless each one of you in the name of Yeshua. Called into Israel, part 6. What about Jacob's prophecies? Quite an interesting topic today. Yeshua stated in Matthew 5, "Do not suppose that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, unless heaven and earth pass away, not one iota nor one tittle shall pass away from the law until everything happens. Therefore, whoever annuls one of the least of these commandments and teaches that to the people will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." You know, most of the time when commandment keepers use this scripture, the emphasis is on Yeshua not coming to destroy the law. However, Yeshua also includes the prophets, which means that every prophecy that Yahweh gave to a prophet in the Old Testament will happen. It will come to pass. So today we are going to examine the prophecies of Jacob. As you recall, Jacob was born to Isaac, and in turn Isaac was the son of Abraham. Yahweh established the covenant of faith with Abraham because of his faith. He promised that Abraham's seed would be as many as the stars of heaven, it says here in Genesis 15. And he, Yahweh, brought him outside and said, "Look now at the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your seed be." And he believed in Yahweh, and he counted it to him for righteousness. In that day, Yahweh cut a covenant with Abram, saying, "I have given this land to your seed, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates." You know, this is one of those prophecies that had a near fulfillment and then a far off fulfillment, a dual prophecy it's called. The first part of it was given to the Israelites who inhabited the land for several hundred years, and then because of their disobedience, they were taken into captivity. First of all, the northern kingdom was taken into captivity, and then secondly, Judah, the southern kingdom, was. But this is going to be given to the nation of Israel during the millennial kingdom. Here's a scripture that Ezekiel was given, chapter 47. This is what the Adonai Yahweh says. "This is the border you will use to divide the land as an inheritance for the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph will receive 2 shares. You will inherit it in equal portions, since I swore to give it to your ancestors. So this land will fall to you as an inheritance." Now, this is a drawing that someone made up regarding this particular map and the divisions. You can see the red border that goes on the right side of it, and it encompasses part of the land of Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and then, of course, the country of Israel. Well, all of that will belong to the nation of Israel in the millennial kingdom. But you know, I mentioned a moment ago that Abram was justified by faith, but you know, he had to also exercise obedience. His obedience to the instructions of Yahweh were what perfected his faith. Look what it says in the book of James. "Was not our father Abraham justified by his deeds, offering up his son Isaac on the altar? You see how faith helped with his deeds, and how by his deeds the faith was made perfect or complete. And the scripture was fulfilled, saying, "And Abraham believed Yahweh, and it was counted for righteousness to him. And he was called friend of Elohim." You see then how a man by his deeds becomes righteous, and not by faith only. That's critical to understand, particularly in the time in which we live, because many people like to cast aside that idea of obedience. They say, "Oh, you're working for your salvation." No, you're being obedient to the one who has given you salvation. Faith requires us to be obedient, and that's what Abraham was, obedient. You always see faith or belief coupled with obedience in the Bible, in the scriptures. Okay, we're going to move on from Abraham on to Jacob. It is interesting in the scripture when you read about these three Hebrew patriarchs of the faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see their ups and downs. The scripture doesn't pull any punches. It doesn't cover anything up. Our lives are uncovered before the eyes of Yahweh. Our lives are uncovered before his eyes. Everything that we think, everything that we do, he knows. And we will be giving account at the judgment. So the real life failures that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob experienced was because they walked in the flesh at times instead of walking with Yahweh. That's what we are to do. We are to walk with Yahweh, let him guide our steps. And when we do that, then we will stay away from sin and those failures. The three men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I would say that Jacob probably was the least spiritually minded of all of them. Yet, in spite of that, Yahweh changed his name from Jacob to Israel. To be more exact about the name there, nation of Israel is what it's talking about. The whole nation of Israel is named for Jacob. Israel means prince with Elohim, prince with Elohim. Jacob, his name meant supplanter or deceiver. And Yahweh very thankfully changed his name. If we're going to have a name change, we need to leave it up to Yahweh and not attempt to do it by ourselves. That's not our responsibility. Half of the book of Genesis almost is the story of Jacob's life, actually starting from chapter 27 through the end of the book, Jacob and his 12 sons. I don't want to get into any details because those are not pertinent to today's message. But Jacob spent 21 years separated from his mother, Rebekah, his father, Isaac, and his twin brother, Esau. Why? Because he had deceived Esau. He had stolen his birthright. Let me explain about the birthright. In Hebrew culture, the oldest son would receive the birthright of blessing from his father. It was a very important thing. It involved being given a double portion of the inheritance of the father, and then the rest was divided between the remainder of the sons and even the daughters. You might think, well, that sounds rather like favoritism to me, but that's really not the case. A birthright involved responsibility. And the oldest son was intended by Yahweh to be the most responsible one. And that's why the oldest son would receive that birthright. Esau, it was even prophesied while the two of them were in the womb of Rebekah that the younger one, Jacob, would be the leader of the family and not Esau. That has happened throughout Scripture at various times. Even Jacob's 12 sons, Reuben was his firstborn, but because he had a very, very much of a moral indiscretion, he was prohibited from receiving that blessing of the firstborn. Well, when Jacob finally, at the end of 21 years, being away from his family, he was on his way back with his two wives. By this time he had two, and two concubines, and a lot of animals with him, herds and herds of sheep and goats, donkeys, and so on. And he's on his way back, and he heard that his brother Esau was coming to meet him. Well, that frightened him because he knew that he had done wrong to his brother. And so he divided his family up. He divided the herds up. And one night, the angel of Yahweh, Yeshua, the pre-incarnate Yeshua, met him face to face, physically, and began wrestling with him, physically to wrestle with him. Now, Jacob must have been a pretty powerful man. I think the scripture bears that out with an earlier incident that happened. But it turns out that he would not let that angel of Yahweh go. He would not let Yeshua go physically, which of course is symbolic that you and I, we need to hold on to Yeshua. We do not want to be letting go. Hold on. Continue in the faith. Be faithful to Yahweh. Obey the commandments to the end of your life. Well, Jacob held on to Yeshua, and Yeshua finally touched him on his thigh, put his hip out of socket in order to get away from him. But in the process, Yeshua also renamed him as Israel. Like I said, he had sons. He had 12 sons by this time, in fact. And his favorite wife was Rachel. He also had a favorite son, Joseph. You probably remember the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. Well, because of that coat of many colors and the dreams that Joseph had and told his brothers and his entire family about those dreams, his brothers envied him and hated him. And so they decided to put him away, and they did. They actually sold him as a slave to go down to Egypt. And that's where Joseph stayed for 17 years. He was in Egypt, away from his family, and Yahweh blessed him. He was in prison a couple of times, falsely accused, and finally there was a couple of dreams. There's two men that had been one of them was the cook, and another one was another official in Pharaoh's hierarchy, his home, and they each had a dream, and Joseph interpreted those dreams for them, and the dreams came true, actually, the next day or so. And so because of that, Pharaoh then had a dream, and he was told by one of those men that Joseph could interpret the dream. And so he called Joseph in, out of prison. Joseph interpreted the dream, and the dream, of course, was one that, if you have read the story, you know what I'm talking about. The entire world at that time was going to experience 7 years of famine. But before 7 years of famine, there were going to be 7 years of plenty of food. And so Pharaoh appointed Joseph to be the one in charge of gathering the food together, the grain, the corn, and so on, and then distributing that to the people when the 7 years of famine began. Well, after the famine began, it affected Jacob and his other sons that they were still living in the land of Canaan. And Jacob decided to send his sons down to Egypt in order to buy food. Well, when they got down there, unbeknownst to them, they were met by Joseph. And over the course of time, Joseph finally revealed himself to them. They had a great reunion. And Jacob and his entire family, his household, moved to Egypt during the years of famine. Jacob lived 147 years. And before he passed away, he blessed Joseph with that birthright because Joseph had become essentially the firstborn in his life. I mentioned earlier that Reuben, the actual firstborn, had been immoral. And because of that immorality, he lost the right for the birthright. And so that came to Joseph. And so here's what happened when Jacob was going to give the birthright to Joseph. When Israel, talking about Jacob, saw Joseph's sons, he said, well, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons, Yahweh has given to me here. So Jacob said, bring them to me, and I will bless them. Now his eyesight was poor because of old age, and he could hardly see. Joseph brought them to him, and he kissed and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again, but now Yahweh has even let me see your offspring. And then Joseph took them from his father's knees and bowed with his face to the ground. And then Joseph took them both with his right hand, Ephraim, toward Israel's left, and with his left hand, Manasseh, the firstborn, toward Israel's right, and brought them to Israel. But Israel stretched out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, the younger, and crossing his hands, put his left on Manasseh's head, although Manasseh was the firstborn. He then blessed Joseph and said, the Elohim before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the Elohim who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, may he bless these boys, and may they be called by my name and the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow to be numerous within the land. When Joseph saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was a mistake, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And then Joseph said to his father, well, not that way, Father. This is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He too will become a tribe, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his offspring will become a populous nation. So he blessed them that day with those words. The nation Israel will invoke blessings by you, saying, may Yahweh make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, putting Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, look, I'm about to die, but Elohim will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. Over and above what I'm giving your brothers, I am giving you the one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow. So you see here that in this little picture here where Jacob crossed his hands and put his left hand on Manasseh's head, who actually was going to be the firstborn. Now, Manasseh had not done anything wrong to lose the birthright at that point in time. All we can say is that Yahweh evidently gave Jacob, Israel, insight beyond what you and I would normally ever have, and beyond what he would have. And he knew that Ephraim would be the one that would be greater and would be the one to get the actual birthright because of that. Now, this is not some little quaint little Old Testament story. Oh, that's an interesting story. Yeah, okay. No, this is a prophecy. This is a prophecy from Yahweh. And Yahweh was blessing Ephraim above Manasseh. You know, the Bible talks about this birthright business. You know, we don't see that practiced particularly here in America. I don't know if it goes on in some places or not. I guess I would assume that it does in some places, but it generally does not here. Maybe it should. And I do assume that during the millennial kingdom, it will again begin to be practiced. What about the greatness? What about the two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, or actually Ephraim and Manasseh? And Jacob said that the younger one, Ephraim, would be greater. He would have more in population than Manasseh. And what's that all about? Well, it's interesting that here, this is a census. Moses took two censuses, and you can see down toward the bottom, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, the first census was taken shortly after the Israelites left Egypt, and then the second one was taken shortly before the Israelites entered into the Promised Land. But if you can read the ranking of both of those tribes, in the first census that was taken, Ephraim ranked number 10 as far as population goes. Now, we're talking here about the census was taken of the fighting men, of those that were army, eligible to be in the army. So there were 40,500 fighting men in Ephraim, and Manasseh had 32,200. But then the second census shows an actual reduction. Ephraim went from being ranked number 10 to number 11. They dropped in fighting men population by 8,000, down to 32,500. Manasseh increased, actually, to be quite a bit larger than Ephraim. Excuse me. So what gives? I mean, they're both ranked in the bottom half of the population of the entire 12 tribes of Israel. Well, Jacob had blessed Ephraim and Manasseh to be huge in population, but evidently that did not happen according to any scripture. There's no scripture record that while they were living in the land of Israel, that Ephraim and Manasseh were larger than any of the other tribes, and for sure that Ephraim was larger than Manasseh. You know, prior to the captivity of the northern kingdom, the house of Israel, the prophet Amos quoted Yahweh. He said this, "Behold, the eyes of Yahweh Elohim are on the sinful," talking about Israelite, the northern kingdom, "and I will destroy it from the face of the earth." In other words, it would vanish as a kingdom, not as a people, but as a kingdom. "Except that I will not completely destroy the house of Jacob," or Israel, says Yahweh. "For lo, I will command, and I will shake the house of Israel among all of the nations, as one shakes with a sieve, yet not a grain shall fall to the earth." So in other words, the people of the northern kingdom were going to be displaced. The government was going to disappear, but the people would continue on. And they did. They were sifted and have been sifted throughout all the nations on the earth. You know, Daniel, the prophet Daniel, wrote when he was in captivity in Babylon, which was the captivity of the Jews from Judah there, going into Babylon occurred about 125 or 130 years after the northern kingdom was taken captive by the Assyrian Empire. Here's what Daniel said. You know, he refers to the house of Israel and he says they were afar off. Now, that's a very interesting term. You know, when we use that word afar off, or that phrase afar off, we're generally talking about some location that's quite a ways away. But when it's talking about prophecy in the scriptures, afar off specifically refers to the northern kingdom. The scripture actually in some places says those who are near and those who are afar off. Let me explain a little bit more. Daniel chapter 9, verse 7. "O Yahweh, righteousness belongs to you, but to us the shame of our faces. As it is this day to the men of Judah and to those living in Jerusalem and to all Israel who are near and who are afar through all the lands where you have driven them for their unfaithfulness which they have done against you." Like I said, that term afar off, when it's talking in prophecy of Scripture, it's referring to the nation of the northern kingdom of Israel. This is a map that someone made up, and you can see the label here, more toward the center of it, the captivity, showing the dates when Israel, first of all, was taken to Assyria, and then Judah was taken to Babylon. And you can see the close proximity, excuse me, the close proximity of the Israelite settlements with that of the Jewish settlements. This is Babylon right there. And the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, all of this area here, was where Israel, the northern kingdom, had been settled. In a scale of miles here, 200 miles, you see, so the distance between these areas is fairly near. That would be approximately, I'm saying, the distance from here to Little Rock, Arkansas. Even this area over here. But there were other areas that I'll show you in a moment where the northern kingdom had migrated that were afar off. Now, these are important things to understand because there is an inherently anti-Israel, anti-Jew bias in the archaeological community and also in the media. Amos's prophecy about being sifted throughout the entire world is a prophecy that has happened. It did not go away, and they did not go away. It refers to Israel's ancient captivity, and it's also showing where the descendants of Israel, the northern kingdom, have gone. We'll see that. And through it, Yahweh shows that the physical nation of Israel would not become so mixed and so amalgamated that they would disappear. They would continue on. Yahweh said that not one grain would fall to the ground. This is a map showing the approximate, and I have to emphasize the approximate, migration routes that the northern kingdom did. You can see here is the Assyrian Empire, and then you see the lines going in various places. It turns out when true archaeology has been conducted that they have found that this name right here, Gamir, is actually originated with Omri, who is one of the kings of the northern kingdom. In fact, the kingdom used to be called the kingdom of Omri, or Gamri, or Gamir. You know, it becomes in various pronunciations in various languages and such. Also, the Cimmerians and the Scythians, those are also offshoots of the northern kingdom of Israel. They went to those places. When you actually do research on the Cimmerians and the Scythians, they are people that it says in the history books, and I was looking at some the last few days in preparation for this message, it says, well, they just suddenly sprang up. Well, millions of people do not just suddenly spring up. And also, you know, they said that the northern kingdom was just dispersed and they just disappeared. Well, millions of people do not just disappear. That does not make a lick of sense. And so all of these lines here showing the direction, this is present-day Turkey right in here. And for instance, this is Crimea and Ukraine right up in there. So the northern kingdom began migrating all over the world. After they had spent several decades, after the northern kingdom had spent several decades in Assyria, they began migrating westward and northward in order to be separate from the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians were a chief rival, and before Assyria conquered Babylon, the inhabitants there of the northern kingdom, they wanted to stay away from that fighting. They exist to this day, my friends. They are largely ignorant of their true identity. They are no longer commandment keeping. They're no longer Sabbath keeping. And they are not of pure bloodline. There's no such thing as a pure bloodline anymore. I was doing some research with what's called DNA testing. Maybe some of you have had your DNA tested, and they will say, perhaps, well, you have people in your heritage that came from Scotland and came from Germany and came from England. But where did they come from? You see, it's all a time period. I mean, it's all related to migrations over a period of time. That's what your DNA is a result of. So when people say, well, I know that I'm of this pure bloodline of such and such. No, there's no such thing. In fact, geneticists say there is no such thing as a pure bloodline anymore. The entire human race has become amalgamated with one another. There may be a predominant area in your life that is of a bloodline that you can be assured of, but you still have other bloodlines mixed in with yours. There's a case in point I want to show you or tell you about. Even Yeshua himself in the book of Matthew, his bloodline is traced through Mary, his mother. Do you realize that there were 4 ladies in his bloodline that were of Canaanite descent? They were not Hebrew at all. And yet Yeshua very deliberately, and Yahweh the Father very deliberately had those people to be included in Yeshua's bloodline. That proves what I'm saying, I do believe. Hebrews chapter 11, I'm going to go there. It's called the Hall of Faith. You've heard of a Hall of Fame in sports and so on. Well, this is the Hall of Faith. This is a true Hall of Fame, okay? Each person in that chapter had exercised their faith in Yahweh. It's very intriguing what it says here about Jacob. By faith, when dying, Jacob blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped on the top of his staff. It only mentions his 2 sons. It doesn't actually give them their names, it just says Joseph's sons. It doesn't say anything about the remaining 10 sons of Jacob, just these 2 of Joseph. I'm not implying that the other sons are not important at all, not at all. In fact, the 12 sons of Jacob, each son will have his name inscribed on one of the gates of the New Jerusalem that will be coming down from heaven. Look what it says here, Revelation 21. He then carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from Yahweh, arrayed with Yahweh's glory. Her radiance was like a very precious stone, like a jasper stone, bright as a crystal. The city had a massive high wall with 12 gates. 12 angels were at the gates. The names of the 12 tribes of Israel's sons were inscribed on the gates. Isn't that interesting? Is it any wonder that I preach that we are called into the nation of Israel? Yes, we are. This is someone's drawing of the New Jerusalem, and it says here that, first of all, and it's not mentioned in this scripture, but it's a couple verses later on, the foundation is going to be made up of the 12 apostles, the names of the 12 apostles. These are all Jews, my friends. And the 12 gates will have, each one, I guess, is going to have the name of one of the 12 sons of Jacob, the names of Israel, inscribed on those gates. We are called into Israel. Make no mistake about it. So, where are Manasseh and Ephraim today? Have they just disappeared? Well, mostly Manasseh and Ephraim migrated north into southern Russia and westward, mostly into Europe, United Kingdom, what's presently United Kingdom, Ireland, North America, even Latin America, South America. They have found religious artifacts in Latin America. They have discovered people that have anciently been observing the 10 Commandments in Latin America. They were not taught that in the last several hundred years. They had been taught that over 2,000 years ago. It's been passed on. The remnants of, excuse me, Manasseh and Ephraim have gone into North America, the United Kingdom, and Australia. These are all places where the two tribes have gone. Now, I want to make something very clear here. This is not some white supremacist idea. I abhor white supremacism. I abhor racism. I hate anti-Semitism. Yahweh hates it, every bit of that. And I do too. Makes me upset to even hear people try to justify it. Makes me vehemently angry. The tribes of Ephraim and Mannasseh are not white only. We must get that straight. The fact remains, though, that Jacob's prophecy is still in the process of being fulfilled. It did not go away. The northern kingdom did not go away. And Ephraim and Manasseh are part of what's called the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Yeshua's mission was to reclaim those lost sheep. He said in Matthew 15, he replied, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, this particular story here in Matthew 15, he was talking to a woman that was a Canaanite. And so you would say to yourself, well, if he's sent just to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, then she couldn't get born again. She couldn't get saved. I differ with you. Look what he said in the next verse. But coming, she worshiped him, saying, Master, help me. Then answering, Yeshua said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. Yeshua's mission also includes whosoever will. Whosoever will may come. There's a song made up about that. You and I are to take up the mantle of Yeshua to reclaim those of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And we're not to stop there. We are to also take those that want to come. It says in Revelation 22, both the Spirit and the bride say, come. And let whoever hears say, come. And let whoever thirsts, come. And whoever wants to, let him take the water of life free of charge. That includes black, white, yellow, brown. It doesn't matter your color whatsoever. Do you understand that? All people are welcome in the kingdom as long as they first of all exercise faith in Yeshua and obey the commandments. You and I have the responsibility to witness to people. We are not to be selective and just witness to a particular culture or a particular color that we may prefer. No. We are to witness to everyone that has an ear to hear. Matthew 28, Yeshua said, Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Do you know that it will be the 12 tribes who will be making up the great multitude in Revelation chapter 7? When they come to the realization and acknowledge that Yeshua is Messiah and begin to obey all the commandments, look what it says here. Marvelous, marvelous passage. John says in chapter 7, After this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were robed in white, with palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our Elohim, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. And then one of the elders asked me, well, who are these people robed in white? Where did they come from? And then he told me, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Right now, the northern kingdom has dirty robes. They are not observing the holy Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week. They are mostly involved in worshiping on the first day of the week called Sunday. But in the Great Tribulation, the light will come on, and they will turn from their Sunday worshiping. They will begin to worship on the Sabbath day. They will begin to obey all of the commandments. They will begin to obey all of Yahweh's holy days, not just the seventh day Sabbath, all of Yahweh's holy days, which in Leviticus 23 is called the Sabbaths of Yahweh. And when that happens, they will be a part of this great multitude. Check it out for yourself. You and I have the truth. We are to share the truth. And if we do not, we will be held accountable. So be a Berean, my friends. And until next Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom.